Spring rain had wrapped Victorian London in a veil of silver. Every rooftop glistened beneath low clouds, every cobblestone reflected the blurred glow of iron street lamps, and every passing carriage scattered tiny fountains of water across the broad avenues leading toward Parliament. Flower stalls stood beneath striped awnings, their baskets overflowing with fresh primroses, bluebells, daisies, and fragrant wild violets that filled the damp morning air with the scent of new beginnings. Yet despite the season's gentle beauty, there remained an unmistakable loneliness drifting through the city, as though even the rain remembered losses too heavy for sunlight alone. Duke Adrian Ashbourne noticed none of it. His carriage rolled slowly away from Parliament after another exhausting morning spent refusing proposals disguised as patriotic duty. Influential lords had praised stability, noble women had smiled with practiced elegance, and political allies had politely insisted that the kingdom needed its widowed duke to marry again. Every conversation ended exactly where it always did, with someone reminding him that children required a mother and estates required alliances. They spoke of titles, fortunes, and influence. No one spoke of grief. No one asked whether his children still whispered good night to the portrait of the woman they had buried 3 springs before. Across from him sat those children in thoughtful silence. 12-year-old Edmund watched raindrops race each other down the carriage window, his quiet intelligence often making him seem older than his years. Beside him, 10-year-old Charlotte carefully protected something hidden beneath her cloak, glancing toward it every few moments with barely concealed excitement. Youngest of all was 7-year-old Oliver, whose bright spirit had survived tragedy more stubbornly than anyone expected, though his smile had become rarer since losing his mother. The Duke finally noticed their unusual behavior. "What treasure are you guarding so carefully?" he asked gently. Charlotte exchanged a quick look with her brothers before answering. "It is a surprise, father." Oliver could never keep secrets for long. "We bought flowers," he blurted happily. Edmund sighed with affectionate resignation. "We used the allowance we've been saving." The Duke blinked in surprise. "I thought you were saving for the mechanical train displayed near Hyde Park." "We changed our minds," Charlotte answered softly. Before he could ask why, their carriage slowed behind a line of traffic halted by wagons struggling through the rain. Looking through the misted glass, he saw an elderly florist arranging small hand-tied bouquets beneath a weathered canvas shelter. Her hands trembled from age, yet every bouquet was assembled with loving precision, combining simple wildflowers into modest works of beauty. Charlotte smiled. "That is Mrs. Hawthorne. You know her?" "We visit every Saturday." Oliver nodded proudly. "She lets us help tie the ribbons." The Duke stared at them in astonishment. Neither he nor the household staff had mentioned these quiet excursions. Somehow his children had formed a friendship entirely their own. Edmund lowered his voice. "She says people buy roses to impress others." Charlotte finished the thought. "But they buy wildflowers when they truly care." For a long moment the Duke could think of no reply. His late wife had loved wildflowers above every cultivated bloom in the palace gardens. Whenever spring returned, she gathered them herself instead of ordering servants to arrange expensive displays. She often told the children that beauty growing freely beside the road carried more honesty than flowers forced into perfect rows behind stone walls. Oliver carefully lifted the little bouquets from beneath Charlotte's cloak. "They're for someone lonely." The Duke smiled sadly. "Do you already know who?" His youngest shook his head. "Mama always said we would know when we saw them." Traffic finally began moving again. The Duke leaned back, believing the conversation finished, never imagining those innocent words would alter every year still waiting before them. Only a few streets later, another procession entered the boulevard. Even before anyone announced its arrival, London recognized the unmistakable grandeur of the royal carriage. Polished black lacquer gleamed beneath the rainfall, golden crests shimmered upon its doors, for magnificent horses advanced with disciplined elegance, and uniformed guards rode alongside with perfect precision. Shopkeepers bowed. Gentlemen removed their hats. Pedestrians hurried toward the sidewalks as protocol demanded. Inside the carriage sat a young royal lady dressed in a radiant golden gown embroidered with delicate silver blossoms that caught the muted daylight whenever the carriage passed beneath the lamps. A jeweled tiara rested lightly within her chestnut hair, yet despite every symbol of privilege surrounding her, her expression carried a quiet melancholy as she studied several leather-bound reports resting upon her lap. Oliver tugged urgently at Charlotte's sleeve. "There." Charlotte followed his gaze. "So do I." Edmund whispered almost reverently. "She looks like she's pretending to smile." Before the Duke realized their intention, all 3 children had opened the carriage door and splashed into the rain. "Edmund," he called. But they were already running across the wet cobblestones, each carrying one precious bouquet. The royal coachman instinctively prepared to continue past the children. Then a calm feminine voice spoke from within. "Stop." Every wheel ceased turning. Every guard looked toward the carriage in confusion. Every passerby froze. The magnificent door slowly opened. The royal lady stepped gracefully into the spring rain without waiting for anyone to hold an umbrella above her. Instead of towering over the children from the carriage steps, she gathered her skirts, knelt upon the rain-damp stones until her eyes met theirs, and accepted each tiny bouquet with both gloved hands as though receiving priceless treasures. "What are your names?" she asked warmly. One by one they answered. She repeated every name perfectly. Then she smiled with unmistakable sincerity, a smile that reached the sadness hidden within her eyes. Several yards away, Duke Adrian stood motionless beneath the falling rain, unable to explain why the simple scene unfolding before him felt more extraordinary than every grand ceremony he had witnessed inside Parliament. As the lady continued speaking gently with his children, entirely forgetting the waiting procession behind her, he realized he was watching a royal woman who cared nothing for appearances, and somewhere far beyond the rain, inside Buckingham Palace itself, a queen waited to hear whether today's journey had finally uncovered the future Duchess her kingdom desperately needed. The spring rain lingered over London long after the royal carriage disappeared beyond the mist, but its memory refused to leave Duke Adrian Ashbourne's thoughts. During the journey home, his children spoke excitedly about the graceful lady who had accepted their humble bouquets as though they were gifts fit for a queen. Oliver insisted she possessed the kindest smile he had ever seen. Charlotte admired how carefully she remembered each of their names. Edmund, usually cautious in his judgments, quietly observed that she had looked directly into people's eyes instead of over their shoulders. The Duke listened without interrupting, surprised that a meeting lasting only minutes had restored a brightness to his children that months of tutors, holidays, and expensive entertainments had failed to awaken. Far across the city, the magnificent carriage crossed the palace gates beneath fluttering royal banners. Servants hurried through marble corridors while guards saluted respectfully, believing the day's journey had been another routine inspection of charitable institutions. Only one person inside Buckingham Palace knew its true purpose. Queen Adelaide waited alone inside her private morning room. The chamber overlooked gardens where fresh rain sparkled upon white roses, yet even their beauty failed to distract the queen from the weight of responsibility resting upon her shoulders. The kingdom admired Duke Adrian as a principled statesman whose integrity could not be purchased, but his continued refusal to remarry had quietly become a concern reaching far beyond palace gossip. Advisors feared political instability. Noble families competed endlessly to secure an alliance with his respected house. Every ambitious mother imagined her daughter becoming the future Duchess of Ashbourne. The queen desired none of those ambitions. She wanted peace for one grieving family. As the royal lady entered, the queen dismissed every attendant before speaking. "Tell me honestly," she said, "did today change anything?" The young woman removed her damp gloves and carefully placed 3 tiny wildflower bouquets upon the polished walnut table between them. "It changed everything." The queen studied the simple blossoms in silence. "They offered these willingly? They believed I looked lonely." The queen's thoughtful expression softened. "And were they wrong?" For the first time that morning, the royal lady smiled without restraint. "No, your majesty." Months earlier, the queen had entrusted her with a mission hidden even from ministers and members of the royal household. Officially, she traveled throughout the kingdom representing the crown at ceremonies, charities, concerts, and noble gatherings. Secretly, however, she observed every unmarried lady considered worthy of marrying the widowed duke. She attended glittering balls where perfect manners concealed cold hearts. She visited elegant estates where generosity lasted only while influential guests remained present. She watched polished conversations, rehearsed acts of compassion, and carefully staged charitable donations designed to impress society rather than relieve suffering. Every report she delivered contained graceful handwriting and the same disappointing conclusion: beautiful, accomplished, well-connected, not compassionate. Again and again appearances triumphed over sincerity. The queen never questioned her judgment. She had chosen this young royal companion precisely because she possessed an uncommon gift for recognizing goodness hidden beneath ordinary moments. Born into an honorable but modest noble family, Lady Eleanor Fairmont had spent her childhood visiting hospitals alongside her physician father and village schools beside her mother, who believed kindness required consistency rather than applause. Those quiet lessons had shaped a woman who valued unnoticed decency above celebrated generosity. Now, seated beside the Queen, Eleanor found herself unable to forget 3 rain-soaked children carrying wildflowers instead of expectations. "They never asked who I was," she whispered. "They simply wished to brighten a stranger's day." The Queen nodded thoughtfully. "And what did their father do?" He watched. With suspicion? With sadness? The Queen folded her hands. "I have known Adrian since he was younger than Edmund. He was never difficult, only deeply loyal. After losing his wife, he stopped searching for happiness because he believed doing so would somehow betray her memory." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "I saw that devotion. You also saw something else." She hesitated only briefly. "I think he no longer seeks another wife." The Queen raised one curious eyebrow. "What does he seek?" "A woman his children would trust before he ever could." Silence settled gently between them. Outside, rainwater dripped steadily from palace balconies, creating a quiet rhythm that echoed through the open window. Finally the Queen stood. "Then perhaps we have been asking the wrong question all along. Instead of asking which noblewoman deserved the Duke, she should have asked which woman deserved his children." The realization transformed the entire mission. No ballroom could answer that question. No banquet. No formal introduction. No carefully rehearsed display of generosity. Only ordinary days could reveal extraordinary hearts. Within hours, discreet letters left the palace under royal seal. They announced that Lady Eleanor would travel to several educational charities sponsored by Parliament, including schools and village programs supported by Duke Adrian's estate. The visits appeared entirely administrative, requiring no ceremony and attracting little public attention. No invitation mentioned the true purpose hidden beneath elegant language. When the Duke received the official correspondence 2 mornings later, he accepted the inspection without hesitation. Charitable institutions welcomed royal oversight, and his late wife had devoted countless hours to improving village education. Honoring that work felt natural. His children reacted differently. "Is the flower lady coming?" Oliver asked, nearly spilling his breakfast tea. Charlotte smiled before their father could answer. "I hope she remembers us." Edmund looked thoughtfully toward the rain-washed gardens beyond the dining room windows. "I think she will." The Duke said nothing, though he secretly wondered the same. He remembered the remarkable way she had repeated each child's name after hearing it only once, as though every introduction deserved careful keeping. Elsewhere, preparations quietly unfolded. Elegant traveling gowns replaced ceremonial attire. Official escorts were reduced. Protocols were simplified. Eleanor requested fewer servants than palace custom required, explaining that large processions often prevented genuine conversations with ordinary people. The Queen approved every unusual request without hesitation because she finally understood that authenticity could never flourish beneath overwhelming displays of royal grandeur. As the modest procession departed Buckingham Palace at sunrise, Eleanor carried no jewels beyond a simple pearl brooch and no documents except a leather journal reserved exclusively for confidential observations. Before closing its cover, she wrote one final sentence beneath the date. "Perhaps the greatest examination is not discovering who deserves a crown. Perhaps it is discovering who quietly lives as though every stranger already wears one." She closed the journal gently, unaware that the road leading toward Ashbourne Estate would ask far more searching questions than either she or the Queen had imagined. Morning sunlight finally broke through the lingering spring clouds as Lady Eleanor Fairmont's modest procession entered the grounds of Ashbourne Estate. Overnight rain had left pearls of water clinging to every rosebud, while birdsong drifted gently through ancient oaks lining the long gravel drive. Unlike the intimidating grandeur of many aristocratic residences, the estate possessed an inviting warmth. Flower beds overflowed with wild blossoms instead of carefully sculpted displays, climbing ivy softened weathered stone walls, and children's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere beyond the gardens. Eleanor immediately sensed that although sorrow had visited this home, love had never completely departed. Duke Adrian welcomed her with quiet courtesy upon the front steps. Gone were the glittering halls of Parliament and London's endless expectations. Dressed in a simple dark morning coat rather than formal ceremonial attire, he appeared less like one of the kingdom's most respected noblemen and more like a father determined to preserve the peaceful refuge his late wife had created. "We are honored by your visit, Lady Eleanor," he said warmly. "The honor is mine, Your Grace." Their conversation remained brief. She politely explained that her purpose was to observe village schools, libraries, and charitable programs supported by the estate. Adrian accepted the explanation without suspicion, though curiosity lingered behind his thoughtful eyes. He remembered the extraordinary woman from the rainy London street, yet nothing in her calm manner suggested she carried any secret beyond her official responsibilities. Before another word could be exchanged, hurried footsteps approached across the terrace. Oliver reached her first. "You remembered." Eleanor smiled. "I promised myself I would." Charlotte curtsied gracefully before producing a tiny packet wrapped in blue ribbon. "We saved these for you." Inside rested wildflower seeds gathered from the same elderly florist whose bouquets had begun their unexpected friendship. "They're forget-me-nots," Charlotte explained. "So you'll remember us." Eleanor accepted the gift with unmistakable emotion. "I could never forget." Edmund stood quietly beside his younger siblings before asking the question none of them had voiced. "Will you walk through Mother's garden?" The Duke instinctively looked toward the neglected corner of the estate hidden beyond rows of blooming roses. He had not entered that garden since the funeral. It had once belonged entirely to his wife. After losing her, every unopened blossom had become another reminder of absence. Eleanor noticed the hesitation passing silently across his face. "If your grace prefers otherwise, we need not disturb it." Adrian slowly shook his head. "No." He looked toward his children. "I believe it is time." Together they crossed winding stone paths until reaching a weathered wooden gate covered in climbing vines. Beyond it lay a forgotten sanctuary where nature had continued growing despite grief. Lavender bushes stretched untamed across narrow borders. White daisies bloomed beside cracked stepping stones. Wild roses climbed faded trellises without direction, while delicate bluebells swayed gently beneath old apple trees. Charlotte knelt beside one flower bed. "Mother planted these every spring." Oliver pointed toward another corner. "She said butterflies always know where kindness lives." Eleanor crouched beside them. Perhaps she was right. Instead of merely admiring the neglected garden, she quietly removed her gloves and began clearing fallen branches from one flower bed. Without instruction, Charlotte joined her. Oliver gathered scattered stones. Edmund carefully straightened leaning supports for climbing roses. The Duke watched from beneath the gate. No announcement had been made. No servants applauded. No court artist stood ready to preserve the scene. Lady Eleanor simply worked because the garden mattered to the children. For nearly 2 peaceful hours they restored pathways hidden beneath weeds, replanted crushed blossoms, and gently tied drooping stems upright. Mud stained Eleanor's skirts, damp earth covered her fingertips, and loose strands escaped her carefully arranged hair. Yet she laughed whenever Oliver proudly discovered another blooming flower hidden beneath overgrown leaves. Something unfamiliar stirred within Adrian. He had witnessed countless charitable demonstrations organized by fashionable society ladies, but every one of them had carefully protected expensive gowns from even the smallest inconvenience. This woman seemed entirely unconcerned. When the work finally paused, they gathered beneath an ancient oak overlooking the restored garden. Edmund quietly studied the flowers before speaking. "Father hasn't smiled here since Mother died." Silence settled gently over them. Adrian lowered his eyes. "I thought smiling here meant forgetting." Eleanor answered softly. "No." He looked toward her. "It means remembering without fear." The words entered his heart with unexpected force. Later that afternoon, Eleanor accompanied the children into the village to inspect the small library supported by the estate. Along the way they passed elderly widows tending tiny vegetable plots, laborers repairing cottages damaged during winter storms, and children racing barefoot through damp meadows bright with buttercups. She greeted every person by stopping rather than merely waving. She listened. She asked names. She remembered stories. An aging veteran struggled to lift heavy sacks outside the mill. Without hesitation, Eleanor helped him carry them despite protests from nearby attendants. "You needn't trouble yourself, my lady," the old soldier insisted. She smiled kindly. "I've never believed kindness is trouble." Adrian observed quietly from several paces behind. Again no audience surrounded her. Again no recognition seemed expected. Near sunset dark clouds unexpectedly gathered above the valley. A frightened carriage horse reared violently after thunder cracked across the hills. Nearby children screamed as villagers scattered away from the panicked animal. Before anyone else reacted, Eleanor stepped calmly toward the trembling horse. She spoke so softly Adrian could not hear the words. Slowly she rested one gentle hand against its neck. The terrified creature lowered its head. Within moments, it stood peacefully beside her, breathing steadily while rain began falling once more. Oliver stared in amazement. "You weren't afraid?" Eleanor smiled sadly. I think fear becomes smaller when someone understands it. Those simple words lingered inside Adrian long after they returned to the estate beneath umbrellas glistening with fresh rain. That evening, while the children excitedly described every moment of the day over supper, he found himself watching Eleanor rather than listening to the conversation. She noticed when Oliver quietly offered Charlotte the larger piece of bread. She thanked servants by name. She asked the elderly housekeeper whether her aching knee had improved since winter. Somehow she carried herself with unmistakable dignity while making everyone around her feel unexpectedly important. After dinner, twilight settled across the gardens in delicate shades of blue and silver. Unable to sleep, Adrian wandered outside toward the restored flower garden. Soft voices drifted through the evening air. Hidden behind flowering lilacs, he saw Eleanor seated upon a weathered stone bench beside his children. Oliver leaned against her shoulder. Charlotte carefully held a lantern. Edmund looked thoughtfully toward the stars emerging between drifting clouds. Then the youngest whispered one heartbreaking question. If Mother could see the flowers now, do you think she'd be happy? Eleanor looked toward the blooming garden before answering with quiet certainty. I think she already is. Standing unseen within the shadows, Adrian closed his eyes against emotions he had buried for years, unaware that the greatest test unfolding at Ashbourne Estate was no longer measuring the woman sent by the Queen. Without anyone announcing it, his own wounded heart had quietly begun answering questions it had refused to face since the day he lost the love of his life. The weeks that followed transformed Ashbourne Estate in quiet ways no visitor could have measured. The restored garden flourished beneath gentle spring rains, children laughed more freely through the corridors, and Duke Adrian found himself lingering over breakfasts that once ended in silence. Yet beyond the peaceful hills surrounding his home, another world continued turning according to ambition instead of affection. Across London, newspapers announced that the Queen would soon reveal the woman chosen to become the future Duchess of Ashbourne. The proclamation ignited drawing rooms, ballrooms, and noble households with relentless excitement. Mothers ordered new gowns for their daughters. Jewelers worked through the night crafting glittering necklaces. Rumors multiplied faster than blossoms in spring, each claiming privileged knowledge of the Queen's intentions. Several influential ladies considered victory nearly certain. Lady Beatrice Winthrop boasted that her family's centuries of royal service guaranteed success. Lady Helena Norwood quietly reminded acquaintances that her father's political influence had become indispensable to Parliament. Lady Margaret Ellsworth arranged lavish donations to fashionable charities immediately before photographers arrived, ensuring every newspaper praised her generosity. Invitations flooded noble estates as society prepared to celebrate a marriage believed destined to strengthen the kingdom itself. Only Ashbourne Estate remained strangely untouched by the fever surrounding the announcement. Adrian avoided every conversation regarding possible brides. Whenever neighboring gentlemen attempted polite speculation during council meetings, he redirected discussion toward harvests, village schools, or public hospitals. His heart had changed in ways he scarcely understood, yet he refused to name those feelings before examining them honestly. He had promised himself after his wife's death that no decision affecting his children would ever be guided by loneliness alone. Meanwhile, Eleanor continued fulfilling the duties assigned under her official inspection. She visited classrooms, libraries, and orphan schools without ceremony, always choosing ordinary routes instead of grand processions. Wherever she traveled, people remembered her because she listened before speaking. Farmers recalled conversations months later. Elderly widows treasured handwritten notes she quietly sent after returning to London. Village children ran eagerly beside her carriage because they knew it often stopped when they waved. She never realized these unnoticed moments were becoming whispered stories spreading quietly throughout the countryside. One afternoon, while preparing to leave Ashbourne Estate for the palace, Oliver approached carrying a carefully wrapped bundle. "We made something for you." Charlotte untied the ribbon. Inside rested the 3 pressed wildflower bouquets they had offered on the rainy London street, now preserved between delicate sheets of handmade paper decorated with tiny painted forget-me-nots. "We thought the flowers deserved to stay together," Edmund explained. Eleanor accepted the fragile keepsake with glistening eyes. "I shall protect them always." Adrian watched the exchange from the library doorway. Something inside him tightened unexpectedly. The children were not offering flowers anymore. They were entrusting memories. That evening, Eleanor prepared to depart before sunrise. Housemaids folded traveling gowns while attendants organized correspondence for Buckingham Palace. Yet despite the orderly bustle surrounding her, she found herself lingering beside the restored garden beneath moonlit skies. Every blossom seemed to carry echoes of laughter shared with three remarkable children who had unknowingly restored pieces of her own guarded heart. Footsteps approached softly behind her. She turned to find Adrian standing beneath the old apple tree. "I wish to thank you," he said. "There is no need." "There is." He looked across the garden where fresh bluebells swayed gently beneath silver moonlight. "I believed grief required preserving everything exactly as it was. You taught my children that love can continue growing." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "They taught me the same lesson." Neither spoke for several moments. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt understood. Finally Adrian asked quietly, "Will you return?" She smiled gently. "If duty allows." He wanted to ask whether duty ever listened to the heart. Instead he simply nodded. At dawn her carriage disappeared beyond flowering hedgerows, leaving Ashbourne strangely quieter than before. Days later London awakened beneath brilliant sunshine unlike the rains that had first brought them together. Royal trumpets announced the opening of the Grand Assembly where the Queen would reveal the Duke's future Duchess. Thousands gathered outside palace gates hoping to glimpse history. Elegant coaches crowded every avenue leading toward Buckingham Palace, their polished wheels reflecting banners fluttering above cheering crowds. Inside the magnificent ballroom, crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across marble floors while musicians performed graceful waltzes. Every distinguished family in the kingdom attended. Silk gowns shimmered beneath candlelight. Diamonds sparkled like captured stars. Confident smiles passed between ambitious mothers and hopeful daughters who believed destiny favored wealth, beauty, or influence. Adrian entered accompanied by Edmund, Charlotte, and Oliver. The children wore simple formal clothing rather than elaborate court fashions. Charlotte quietly carried a small velvet case beneath one arm. Whispers followed them immediately. Some guests pitied the widowed duke. Others calculated which noblewoman would soon stand beside him. Across the ballroom Eleanor arrived wearing an elegant ivory gown embroidered with tiny silver flowers, beautiful enough to satisfy every expectation of royalty yet modest beside the extravagant jewels displayed throughout the hall. Many guests scarcely noticed her. They still believed she served merely as one of the Queen's trusted companions. The orchestra fell silent. Queen Adelaide entered with measured dignity, and every conversation ceased instantly. After welcoming the assembled court, she addressed the gathering with calm authority. "For many months," she began, "our kingdom has anticipated today's announcement." Smiles brightened across eager faces. "We have celebrated accomplishments." Noble ladies straightened proudly. "We have admired beauty." Fans fluttered gracefully. "We have praised distinguished family names." Confident glances crossed the ballroom. Then the Queen paused. "But none of those qualities answer the question I wish to ask." A ripple of confusion spread through the hall. She turned toward the entrance. "Would the children of Ashbourne estate please come forward?" Murmurs swept the ballroom. Edmund gently guided his younger siblings toward the center of the polished floor. Charlotte opened the velvet case, revealing the three pressed wildflower bouquets preserved beneath crystal glass. Gasps echoed through the silent chamber. The Queen smiled warmly. "Charlotte," she said softly, "would you tell everyone why you kept these flowers?" The little girl looked toward Eleanor before answering. "Because they're the day we met the lady who stopped." Oliver stepped forward next. Everyone else kept going. Edmund lifted the preserved flowers carefully. "Our mother taught us to give flowers to lonely people." His steady voice carried through the vast ballroom. She was the first person who stopped long enough to accept them. Silence settled over every noble guest. The Queen looked slowly around the magnificent hall. "You believed I spent months searching for the richest lady." No one answered. "You believed titles, fortunes, and appearances would decide today's announcement." Her gaze finally rested upon Eleanor. "You were all mistaken." She turned toward the stunned assembly once more. "The woman standing before you was never touring the kingdom." Every heartbeat seemed suspended. "She was carrying out my secret mission." Adrian stared at Eleanor in astonishment as understanding flooded every memory they had shared, and before anyone could speak another word, the Queen raised one hand to reveal that the greatest truth had yet to be told. The Queen allowed the silence to deepen until every whispered assumption dissolved beneath its weight. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above the assembled court, yet no one seemed to breathe. Every ambitious noblewoman who had entered the ballroom believing herself moments away from triumph now stood motionless, their carefully rehearsed smiles fading into uncertainty. Queen Adelaide stepped down from the dais with unhurried grace and walked toward Charlotte, gently lifting the crystal frame containing the three pressed wildflower bouquets. Holding it high enough for the entire ballroom to see, she spoke with quiet authority. The first examination ended before any of you knew it had begun. She turned slowly, allowing every guest to see the fragile flowers preserved beneath the glass. These blossoms are not valuable because they are rare. They are valuable because they were offered without expectation and accepted without pride. Then she faced Eleanor. 4 months, Lady Eleanor Fairmont believed she was evaluating women worthy of becoming the Duchess of Ashbourne. She attended magnificent balls, elegant banquets, charitable galas, and noble estates. She watched kindness performed beneath chandeliers and generosity displayed before applause. Yet every report she placed upon my desk carried the same sorrowful conclusion. The Queen smiled gently. Compassion cannot be rehearsed. She looked toward the 3 children. So I entrusted the final judgment to hearts incapable of deception. Murmurs rippled across the ballroom. The greatest examination was never held in this palace. Her gaze settled upon the preserved flowers. It happened on a rainy London street, when 3 children offered wildflowers to a stranger who looked lonely. The Queen's voice softened. Every carriage before hers continued without stopping. Another pause followed. She alone stepped into the rain. No one spoke. Even the musicians remained frozen beside their instruments. The Queen returned the crystal frame to Charlotte before addressing the court once more. That single decision revealed everything months of ceremonies could not. She then turned toward Duke Adrian. My friend, the search I began was never for the kingdom. Her eyes glistened. It was always for your children. Adrian could scarcely find his voice. Every memory unfolded with breathtaking clarity. The rainy boulevard. The forgotten garden. The village library. The frightened horse. The evenings spent listening instead of speaking. Not once had Eleanor attempted to impress him. Not once had she sought favor. She had simply lived according to the quiet principles that guided her heart. Slowly, he crossed the polished marble floor until he stood before his children. He knelt first. Not before royalty. Not before the Queen. Before Edmund, Charlotte, and Oliver. Tears shimmered in his eyes as he gathered them close. I believed it was my duty to protect you. His voice trembled. But you have protected me. The children embraced him tightly. Charlotte whispered through happy tears, we only gave flowers. Adrian smiled. No. He gently touched the crystal frame. You gave your father another chance to believe that love still walks this world. The ballroom remained utterly silent as he rose and turned toward Eleanor. For a long moment neither moved. Everything that mattered had already been spoken through countless small moments neither of them had recognized as extraordinary while they were living them. Finally Adrian stepped forward. He did not offer a speech prepared by advisors. He spoke only the truth. When I lost my wife, I promised myself no woman would ever enter our lives because of duty alone. His eyes never left Eleanor's. I believed another marriage would only satisfy politics. He smiled softly. Instead, my children discovered someone who never cared whether anyone was watching. He reached gently for her hands. They trusted you long before I admitted I loved you. Emotion filled Eleanor's eyes. I never came searching for love. I know. I came searching for kindness. And somehow, Adrian replied, kindness found both of us. Before the assembled kingdom, he slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps echoed through the vast hall. Not because a duke proposed, but because every person present understood that this moment had not been arranged by power. It had been earned through countless unnoticed choices. Eleanor Fairmont, Adrian said quietly, will you honor my children by becoming the mother they chose, and honor me by becoming the Duchess my heart has already accepted? Tears escaped freely down her cheeks. With all my heart. The Queen smiled through her own tears. Then let it be known throughout the kingdom that the future Duchess of Ashbourne was chosen neither by wealth nor influence, but by compassion. Applause erupted with overwhelming warmth. Even many who had secretly hoped for another outcome found themselves unable to resent the decision. They had witnessed something greater than victory. They had witnessed truth. Several weeks later, the cathedral bells of London rang beneath brilliant spring skies. People expected unimaginable luxury. Instead, they found something entirely different. The long aisle stretching toward the altar contained no carpets woven with gold thread. No towering arrangements of imported orchids. Instead, thousands upon thousands of fresh wildflowers lined every step. Bluebells from quiet forests. Daisies gathered by village children. Lavender from country farms. Forget-me-nots collected beside winding rivers. Every bouquet had been donated freely by ordinary families whose lives Eleanor had quietly touched during her journey across the kingdom. The elderly florist, Mrs. Hawthorne, stood proudly near the entrance, her weathered hands trembling with joyful disbelief as she arranged the final blossoms. When Eleanor reached her, she embraced the old woman before entering the cathedral. "You planted more than flowers," Eleanor whispered. "You helped plant today." Mrs. Hawthorne smiled through tears. "So did 3 wonderful children." Before the ceremony began, Adrian quietly requested one unexpected stop. The magnificent black and gold carriage turned away from the cathedral and returned briefly to the rain-washed London street where everything had begun months earlier. The rain had long since disappeared. Spring sunlight now danced across the familiar cobblestones. People gathered in surprise as the Duke and Eleanor stepped down together. Oliver ran toward the exact place where they had first offered the bouquets. Charlotte opened another basket filled with fresh wildflowers. Edmund smiled knowingly. Without speeches or announcements, the family began handing flowers to complete strangers. An exhausted laundress. An elderly widower. A young chimney sweep. A nurse carrying medicine. No one understood why members of the royal family were giving away flowers. No explanation was offered. None was needed. By the time the cathedral ceremony finally concluded, the story had already begun spreading through London. Years passed. Ashbourne Estate became known not only for wise leadership but for open gates, flourishing gardens, and laughter echoing through every season. Eleanor loved the children without ever asking them to forget their mother, often telling them that love grows strongest when memories are cherished instead of replaced. Adrian discovered that grief no longer chained his heart because joy had learned to walk beside remembrance rather than erase it. Each spring, on the anniversary of that rainy morning, the royal family returned to the same street carrying baskets overflowing with wildflowers. Soon villages across the kingdom joined the tradition, offering blossoms to strangers, neighbors, soldiers, widows, laborers, and lonely travelers. The celebration became known simply as the Day of Flowers, reminding every generation that nobility begins not with a crown but with compassion. And whenever the old black and gold carriage appeared upon those familiar cobblestones, it always stopped, because an entire kingdom had learned that history is often changed not by grand decrees, but by one quiet act of kindness offered through 3 small bouquets and a heart willing to pause in the rain.